My parents moved to Florida when I was around 15 years old. They were both very successful and made enough money to retire by the age they were, which was somewhere in their mid-40s. To say I wasn't happy about it was an understatement. I would be leaving my childhood hometown and all my friends that lived in it. Additionally, because I went to boarding school, I never really was down there long enough to make any new friends. So when I was home on break, I found myself extremely bored. Video games only entertained me for so long, and I desperately needed another activity to keep me sane. This was when I took up fishing. It was an activity that I still greatly enjoy even today. I started off just fishing from the local boat ramp. However, when I received a small single-person kayak for my birthday, I began venturing out into the estuary that occupied the area between the mainland and the barrier islands that my family lived on. The estuary can seem like another planet sometimes. There are tons of small mangrove-covered islands dotted throughout it. Additionally, the mixing of fresh and salt water led to an incredibly biodiverse ecosystem that was home to some of the coolest wildlife I have ever seen. But none of the wildlife will ever compare to it. I remember the first time I knew something unnatural was lurking out there, like it happened yesterday, though it would be far from the last time I would encounter it. For the sake of time, I will only describe the first account. The day had started off pleasant enough. The weather was sublime, and it was at least 90 degrees out. I had spent most of the day fishing around the various mangrove-covered islands that many fish like to hang out around. It was around 3 o'clock that I ran into an obstacle that I had encountering many times. I was still rather new to fishing, and my cast was far from perfect. One of my casts had resulted in my hook going deep into the mangroves of the island I had been fishing around for the majority of the day, getting snagged on the dense roots of the plants. I sighed, mumbling to myself, "Fuck, not again," as I paddled towards the island to attempt to dig my hook out of the bush. I tied my kayak to a branch and began to wade through the shallow water and into the mangroves. I used my fishing knife to hack away at the plants, following the string deeper and deeper into the island. At one point I considered giving up on it, but I had already lost 6 hooks to the mangroves in the past 3 days, and it was getting expensive replacing them. It was because of this that I chose to ignore the possible risk of getting bit by a snake or chewed up by mosquitoes and ventured on, deeper and deeper. The first thing that I noticed was the smell. It was foul by every essence of the word, like something had died. And while it didn't smell like the typical scent of algae, I was no expert on the matter, so I just assumed that it was a type I had never encountered responsible for the smell. I eventually found my hook, lodged into a root of a mangrove. I grabbed it, twisting it loose from the bark. However, as I looked up, I saw something that nearly made me vacate the contents of my stomach. Pinned to the tree I just dislodged my hook from were at least 4 dead birds held up by wooden stakes. They were pretty far into decomposition, so I was unable to tell what species they were. But what I could tell was that they were not killed by anything natural. The birds had their guts hanging out. Parts of their wings were missing, and most of their eyeballs were gone completely. I stumbled back, tripping over a rock and falling onto my ass in the shallow water. "What the fuck?" I yelled, fighting off the urge to hurl right then and there. I quickly got to my feet, returning to my kayak, in a much faster pace than I had left. I disassembled my fishing rod. I was no longer in the mood for fishing. Plus, it was getting late and I wanted to return home before it got dark. As I began my lengthy kayak trip home, I took some deep breaths. But no matter what I tried, I could not stop thinking about the birds. Their mangled bodies, pinned to a tree like some shit out of a horror movie. I was quickly snapped out of my thoughts by a splash from behind me. It sounded distant, but still too loud to have been from something small. I looked over my shoulder. There was no sign that anything had happened. No ripples in the water, no nothing. I continued paddling. Whatever was going on, I wanted no part of it. And then I heard it again. Closer this time. A loud splash. I quickly looked behind me, but once again, there was nothing. I paddled faster. A small bit of fear began to take a hold of me. Was something following me? I passed by the island that I knew meant I was halfway home, but the feeling of relief was quickly shattered as I heard the snapping of branches behind me. Not like a bird or something landing on a tree, but like a large animal running through the dense mangroves. I didn't bother to look back this time. I just paddled and paddled with all my might, as fast as I could. My hands ached, my arms were sore, but the adrenaline had kicked in, and the fear motivated me far more than anything ever could to paddle harder. For the rest of the way home, I heard nothing. But I never slowed down. I had no intentions of doing so until I could see my house. Thankfully, I would not have to wait long, as I soon saw my house, the windows reflecting the bright orange setting sun back at me. Part of me wished that I had just pulled my kayak up onto my yard and gone inside. Part of me wished that I had just gone into my kitchen and had a nice dinner with my family and forgot about the day's events. But I didn't. No, something inside me was trying to tell me something, trying to tell me to turn around. And I did. And I will regret the decision for the rest of my life. What I saw haunted me to the core. Peeking out from the mangroves was what seemed to be a decomposing human corpse. It stood there in the shallows of an island staring at me. Its skin was a sickly gray color and its eyes were foggy and white. It had no bottom jaw, almost as if it had fallen off at some point. Its skin was covered in green pustules, some of which looked ready to burst at any moment. Parts of its arms and legs hung by mere strings of tendon and tissue. I couldn't move, couldn't talk, couldn't breathe. I just stared at it, and it stared at me. Its dead eyes burrowed into my soul, causing me to tremble with dread, and almost as soon as I had seen it, it retreated back into the mangroves. I quickly put the kayak away, excusing myself from dinner, and went straight to my room. I laid in my bed for hours, thinking about it. I couldn't get its face out my head, but at some point I must have drifted off to sleep as I awoke at 3 a.m., desperately needing to pee. I got up, shambling to the bathroom and taking care of business. As I walked back into my room, something outside my window caught my eye. A tree that was situated at the end of my driveway. But my attention was not on the tree, but on the bird that was pinned to it, with blood dripping from its freshly disemboweled guts.